Maya, is this a good example of imago therapy?
You know, John, that's an interesting question. I think the thing about imago therapy is that people, their personalities and how they work clearly influences how they do imago therapy. But I'd say yes, in the sense that there's mirroring involved. There's a way of holding the way it's set up. It's absolutely imago therapy. Me coaching them and bringing them in on the secrets is certainly an example of imago therapy. Me validating them and helping them pay attention to their connection is certainly typical of imago.
So if Kim and Woody were going to work with you and you were to have your hour and a half each time you saw them, where would you take them? What would be the direction that therapy would go?
Well, one of the things I think is very important, and I really trust this, is I think a couple reveals the amount of information that their couplehood can manage and hold. And I think the way I would start with them the next time, as I think I said earlier, is I would have them be more in the structure, like shorter sends, more aware of how they add things, sort of help them be more structured, because I think they would benefit tremendously from a lot of quieting inside. I'm really excited that they said they're meditating. I think that will help a lot. Slowing way down, noticing. I would also really like them to be more aware of the impact they have on each other. I would spend time doing that because I think oftentimes when people who have grown up feeling so powerless, they don't have any idea the power of their impact, both negative and positive. And I would do that all in the context of having them come in, closing their eyes, doing a sort of centering meditation, getting them to appreciate one thing they appreciate about each other, and then just moving into the dialogue and really focusing on that impact. And particularly getting them to realize that under their anger and their frustration is such a sense of powerlessness and helplessness. And when they can feel more powerful and they can be interested in their partner feeling empowered, the anger will dissipate. So a lot of time spent on showing them that under the anger are so many other emotions that you can have a whole lot more compassion for. And really giving them homework, because I think this couple would do whatever you ask them to do in terms of homework. They're great I can imagine, I was thinking about all the things of going home and having a dialogue, every evening for 5 minutes about something positive, and then maybe once a week trying to do it with something that's difficult. Helping them put the structure in place at home. Also would want to certainly give them the parenting book to help them. They have teenagers, and I think that's they said that about how part of what's so difficult, they're still the same people, but all these new difficulties have come their way. So.
Well, speaking of structure and impact and adding tremendously, let's do that with our program, because it's not just you and I here. We have an audience of professionals and professors who have been waiting to ask some questions.
Sure.
So let's get them involved with some general questions about the theory or any specific questions that you might have about the demonstration that just occurred.
I'm also an imago therapist, as you know, Maya. And I work also with helping couples get the feel for being dialogical, and tell them that they will not always have to use the form of dialogue, of mirror, validate, and empathize, because I don't think people will ultimately talk like that with each other in general. I wondered what you say to them about, you were just talking about the structure, what you say to them about using the structure for a while, and when they can move more away from using the structure particularly. I usually say to them that as the intensity of the struggle increases, they need more and more of the structure. Yes. And that in other ways they will find themselves simply being dialogical with each other by just automatically and naturally listening to each other as they interact throughout their day. And I'm just wondering whether you relate to that with couples, or whether you talk with them about the structure versus just being dialogical.
Well, Leo, the things that you said about that when the struggle is really intense, that's when you need the structure, because the structure will quiet the reactivity, is absolutely right. And that dialogue is so much more than a structure. That is absolutely true. And the more you're in connection with each other, the more you're not going to be talking like that for the rest of your life. Because one of the things I've noticed is if you, for me, and with my couples, when you're very rigid about this is how you have to talk, they lose the deeper value of what it means to be in connection. And I also put a lot of time in having them connect without words, because I think the words are part of it, but I think they also need to learn to be dialogical in terms of how they look at each other, how they energetically connect. So I make it very clear that, as I said earlier, it's great to use in the beginning because it interrupts your bad habits or the habits you learn to protect yourself. But no, of course not. You're not going to do it all the time. And sometimes, even when you're in a really bad place, you may not be able to pull on it. But it's getting more and more able to, when you're having a really hard time, draw on it as a tool. And then as you're closer and more connected, you just naturally interact in a more dialogical fashion. So absolutely, I'm very much on the same page as you. Thanks. That mean? So thank you for the question.
I'm an imago therapist, and I was fortunate enough to train under Maya several times. And Maya, you've mentioned the saboteur in all of us several times throughout different trainings. And I wonder if you can say a few words about that, what you've been doing with that, if you can, kind of anticipate how that would play itself out with this couple, for example.
I thought about that last night. So you're asking about the saboteur. Well, years ago I had a couple that lovingly called their saboteur, that's where it came from, little warplanes. The warplanes are flying. It would be wonderful to think that when we get the love we want and we feel this wonderful connection, we would just bathe in it and everything would be fine. But I really think that the hardest thing for children growing up is loss and disappointment and the terror of traumatic experiences, so that we are guarded against feeling good, because every time we felt good, the other shoe dropped and something bad happened. So I've coined this phrase, I'd rather live in a predictable hell than have a taste of heaven and lose it. That the unpredictability is so terrifying that we will be moving into this work and all this loving stuff will be going on, and instantly somebody says something completely awful and they don't even know where it came from. So I talk to them about that saboteur, that you're not crazy when that stuff happens. Notice when you're very close how all of a sudden one of you will pick a fight. That's not because you're crazy, it's because you're afraid to trust. Because when you're open, loving somebody, learning to love someone is so scary, because it brings forward not only all the way we've been hurt, but really the fact that you could lose this person. It's wonderful to say we want to be intimate, but it's really very scary. So all along the way, I think you need to plant the seed, so that, again, it's not the conflict that's the problem, it's how quickly you recover. So I know in my own relationship, when I find myself doing that, sometimes now we laugh. Well, there goes the saboteur, and then it's not a big deal. It's understandable that. And sometimes people don't know how to ask for distance and space. So they feel, the energy is too close. So they have to fight in order to. So that's the saboteur also. Like, how can you put into words over time so the saboteur has less and less power? But I think another piece, just finally, is that from childhood, that saboteur protected you and kept you safe. So you can't just get rid of it. It's more understanding it, honoring it, and then it has less power, and you have choices about being conscious rather than unconscious about using it. Does that answer the question? Absolutely. It really does.
Thank you.
That's really true. Yeah, Jim.
Madison, Wisconsin again. How do you approach the whole issue of affairs if one of the partners either announces it in the beginning or it comes to light through the dialogue that they're having an affair? What's your general approach to that?
Well, I think in the past, before Imago, it just felt like there was nothing to do and it was hopeless. Because what I would do is the person who was affaired on, or whatever you say, the wronged party, as we called them, the tendency was to let them go on, hoping that they would get it out and then they'd feel better. And what usually happened was that the person who had the affair left because it was so miserable. What Imago has given me is this notion of exits, that everybody is afraid of intimacy, and we do different things to avoid being intimate. We have different ways in which we escape the fear of being too close. One of them is exit, one of them is affairs, drinking is another one, but also working too much is one. So that what's been useful for me is to equalize the couple. Now, you can't do that in the first session. I mean, clearly you have to give some validation to the person who's had been wrong, but you also have to get curious about the person who had the affair, because otherwise they just feel so shamed they won't come back. So it's equalizing. By that I mean, what are the ways in which the relationship, what is this affair calling this relationship to do? Yes, he acted out. Yes, that's not a good way to do it. But what was going on in the relationship, in the relational space, that caused one of you to jump out of it? Let's look at it. And I have, since I've been doing this work, had a lot of success in helping people either come back together, or if they're going to separate, do it in a more loving and compassionate way. And for the person who was affared on, to recognize, what did I do to contribute to it so that I don't invite it again in my life? And what part of me, what was I having an affair with? What is my, and people get very moral about affairs, and it seems to be that's the big trigger. But someone never coming home and working all hours of the night is as much of a, your mistresses, or could be all sorts of things. They can be your work, they can be travel, they can be your family, they can be your children. So I know that the big charge is on, you slept with another person, another woman or man, but I think it's important to see it in a larger context. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's equalizing and getting the system, and looking also, what I said, looking at the positive intent of the negative action. So you don't validate, you don't say the behavior is good, but you look at the positive intent.
Follow-up question, do you ever suggest to them to suspend that other relationship so that there's enough energy in
Absolutely.
what they're trying to do?
Yeah, I'd make it very clear right from the start that if they're not really willing to put that on hold and really break ties, it is really difficult to, and I just say it, and if you're not going to have much success, and you're wasting your money and my time if there isn't some, and sometimes in the beginning I'm not quite that dogmatic, because my wish is the person who's still having the affair to get them interested in the work. So it's not like I come down like a rock in the beginning, but over time, if it continues, I certainly mention in the beginning it'll make our work a lot harder, and then I push harder as I have a relationship with this person.
So you would actually see somebody, a couple in therapy, if one is having another relationship?
If the wife or husband is willing, and in the beginning, yes, but over time, as quickly as I can, I make it really clear that it's not going to work, and and I also, I try to get them on the same team, which is what are the what are the ways that, actually, let me say one other thing. I know it's really hard, and I think this is probably very scary for people to hear, but I think when someone does something like that, there's such pain in them. There's such a longing for something that they're not getting. It doesn't mean they should do that, but they don't have the tools to do anything else. So I also try to help them see otherwise it'll happen again. Let's see what you're wanting. Let's see if we can make it happen, and what are the ways in the future when you have these feelings you can manage them differently.
Well, we're getting near the end of our time. Any final comments that you'd care to make as you kind of pull this experience together? Ideas, about this approach in your work?
Well, one of the things I really want to emphasize, and why I think a lot of people have been training in this model, and there are people all over the world now and in this country, and the workshops have been very useful and have been successful, is that it is a model that encourages you to be, as a therapist, the most of who you really are. And so I think I'd like to dispel the myth that an imago therapist is this cookie-cutter kind of person who does this thing, but rather that the training is so much about you being the best person you can be in the world, that your humanness is the focus, not you as a technician or as a clinician. And that for me is the gift of this theory. And the way we train, the way we give feedback, it's all on the same page, which is we're dialogical in the way we train. We see our trainees as our teachers as well as we teach them. It's much more, and I actually truly believe that anyone who can sit in an office, any new therapist who can sit in an office with that kind of idea that this is a unique situation, you're seeing something new and unique, as Harville once said, a microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe trying to heal itself, but every time anew, you actually are all theorists. because when you look at that phenomenon without a lot of assumptions, you're getting data. And I think that's one of the Imago, what part of what the Imago approach does. It really encourages people to pay attention to what they're doing.
Well, thank you for, sharing yourself and your ideas and, the way that you do what it takes, whether it's home visits or whatever it takes to help people deal with their pain and their fears and the frustrations in life. And, even though your metaphors are a little bit corny, your approach isn't. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. You like the cornfield, yes.